I have the pleasure of ending it. My name is Ryan Bechu, and I have a star-studded panel, I think it's safe to say, including Dr. Dax Driver, who's the Chief Executive down at the end of the Energy Chamber, as well as Philip Julian, who is the Kenneth J. Green Limited Chairman. Kishan Kumar Singh, who is the head of the Multilateral Environmental Unit at the Ministry of Planning and Development, as well as Trinidad and Tobago's lead climate negotiator, Mr. Michael Savrin, who we know from the Ministry of Finance in the government of Dominica, Mr. Nirad Tiwari, who is the AmCham Chief Executive Officer, and last but by no means least, Mr. Anthony Sabga III, who is the Chief Executive Officer, the Group Chief Executive Officer of ANSA McAL Limited. I'm going to go way down at the end and ask Philip Julian to set the table for us. 50 years, Philip, later, we are asked in Trinidad and Tobago to do our second energy transition. Leading this green movement in this country, are you satisfied, dissatisfied, fairly satisfied that we are not further and faster ahead than where we are at this moment?
So, professionally, I understand the time it takes for an energy transition to occur, particularly with the unique, remarkable offering that Trinidad and Tobago has to be the both-and model for the world, embracing and building our natural gas base while incorporating in the renewable energy component for the benefit of our country and our region. That's a big pill to swallow. And I think what is required to accelerate it, where personally, I, like many others, would like to see this transition happen, not just locally, but globally that much faster, is the matter at hand. We're seeing the government's ability to be an enabler, as we saw with the Dragon, making the Dragon dance. We've seen the government's commitment with the first large-scale solar project. It's really now to accelerate that enabling environment to allow private sector, which we've heard over the past couple of hours, we're ready to go. Private sector is ready to drive this, creating that enabling environment for all of us to move collectively into that both-and situation is the matter at hand right now.
Let's talk a little bit about the Dragon gas deal. We've heard about it a few times this morning. Dr. Dax Driver, how should energy transition enthusiasts and activists and those driving the energy transition in this country view the Dragon gas deal? Is it a spoke in the wheel?
No, the exact opposite. It's positive, but I mean, I think there's sort of a bit of an obsession with Dragon because it's been in the news a lot. There are a lot of other gas projects which are going to be coming on stream. We should be taking a final investment decision sometimes quite soon on the Manatee project, Calypso project, the big deep water project next year. So there's natural gas which is going to be coming into the system. It's positive for the energy transition. I mean, both for the fact that it is the cleanest fossil fuel, and and the world wants natural gas to displace coal-fired power with natural gas-fired power is the way in which the world so far has actually reduced its carbon emissions, and it needs to go on doing that. It is also positive for Trinidad because we have to maintain the industry which we have at the moment as we are making this transition. It's going to take a while to bring in green hydrogen. It's going to take a while to bring in blue hydrogen and decarbonize. And you've got to maintain the facilities we already have. Our advantage is our incumbency. So the fact we have this huge, big, massive, global, world-scale natural gas industry in the country, which I think we sometimes ignore how significant this industry is. Having that is what gives us the ability to do big things, okay? And we've got to maintain that, so we've got to bring the feedstock for that in the natural gas if we want to have this transition. If we don't, that industry dies, and we don't have the opportunity to bring in these big changes which people like Philip are driving.
All right, let's get back on track in terms of enabling green energy future. Kishan, you are one of many of the panelists here who are at COP28 in Dubai. The common theme coming out of the Caribbean region was that we need to do this together. We're better off doing this together as opposed to Trinidad and Tobago trying to transition alone or Dominica moving to green energy by itself. That was the common theme. Can this green movement, this green partnership start with just, I'd say, 2 countries?
Well, thank you. I think Mr. Savrin answered the question in the previous panel. It's an incremental approach, and it has to be an incremental approach. Otherwise, the capital required for the entire region to move green at a fast pace would probably be prohibitive. What we have to do is build on what we have. I think Trinidad and Tobago has the infrastructure, the expertise. We have been in the natural gas business for, since 1953, the better part of 70 years, 71 years. So what do we now transition to? We already said natural gas is the cleanest energy form of fossil fuels. What is the next phase? We've been there so that is the status quo. For 70 years, we've been using natural gas for energy production. The next stage has to be renewables. It has to be greener. But otherwise, we get stuck in a technology that will soon be old, and therefore the region now has to build and wean off of the dependency that was articulated in the previous panels, and also now jointly move together towards this transition that we're all speaking so passionately about. And there is value in numbers. And if any one country goes it alone, there are risks in it. We've heard about de-risking investments and so on. So I think the point was made earlier that as a region, you create the scale that is required, but if it's not there in a short time, then incrementally, partner by partner, country by country, going forward, taking what is valuable from each other. With us is the expertise. We have geothermal energy in Dominica and St. Kitts and so on, and building a pool of resources, both human and natural, and capital as well. I think that we can rise to the demands that COP28 actually made in terms of accelerating that transition. And it's no longer, and permit me to say that it's no longer an option. The transition is an imperative.
Yeah, I just wonder, Philip, on the back of Kishan agreeing with Mr. Savrin, I'm sure you probably agree as well, but which two countries are best positioned to begin such a partnership?
Well, selfishly speaking, I would say Dominica and Trinidad. It takes 2 points on a graph to make a straight line. I think incremental is the key word. I think if you have two entities, two nations stepping forward, Trinidad and Dominica, supply demand, I think that will build a natural momentum, because then the other things can evolve from it. So very quick answer to your question.
Yeah, Mr. Savrin, do you see from the seat that you sit in the government of Dominica, do you see the political will for something like this across the Caribbean region?
Well, I'm not sure about the Caribbean region, but certainly my minister was here this morning expressing quite strongly and passionately our commitment. I think at the sub-regional level, the OECS, there's an OECS renewable energy unit that is dedicated to that. The geothermal development that we're doing is in collaboration with our partners in the OECS. So there's work in St. Kitts. We also have work in St. Vincent, and there's work also in St. Lucia and Grenada. So certainly on the geothermal front, there's significant collaboration within the OECS to advance geothermal development. We had various levels of development in that process, but certainly there is that commitment as it comes to geothermal in the sub-region.
Yeah, Nirad, I want to bring you in here. Sure. What are your thoughts on the potential of regional energy security and regional integration of energy?
Sure. So, not being an expert on the technical side of it, let me sort of jump up to the 10,000-foot level and pull together some of the things that were said earlier. So we spoke about high energy costs in the region and the impact on variable costs for consumers and businesses as a result of that, and how that creates uncertainty. That uncertainty creates political pressures. And those political pressures of energy insecurity and price fluctuations create a situation where the region can't come together on everything, and where a point of vulnerability from my perspective for us as a CARICOM region trying to harmonize our foreign policy, trying to harmonize our global ambitions, to be picked apart, as we see, for example, by things like Petro-Caribe, where Guyana is left out and Trinidad doesn't participate, but other countries join it. So if we have energy security underpinned by renewable energy that we have in the region, that can reduce that vulnerability. And from a selfish Trinidad and Tobago perspective, all of the arguments that we get about our manufacturers and businesses have unfair advantages and so on, could be ameliorated because that energy is coming throughout the region. In addition to that, with what is happening in particular in the US, which continues to grow in leaps and bounds with the Inflation Reduction Act, with discussion about whether the USMCA will be expanded, may be far-fetched, but it might be the new alternative to what was once touted as the FTAA. And with the APEP coming out of the Summit of the Americas Partnership for Economics and Prosperity, we have the potential, being the region that is closest to the US, to benefit from rapid increases in technology that can be adopted here and integration into supply chains from the region in a way that as the US itself moves to reshore and nearshore.
Yeah. Mr. Sabga, I want to bring you in here. Much of what the first five gentlemen have spoken about really requires private sector thrust, private sector investment. When Philip Julian would have given his opening remarks a little bit earlier, he spoke of the importance of private sector. As head of one of the biggest conglomerates in the region, are you satisfied with how the private sector has approached this green movement and the requirements that the private sector to get involved in this? You're not.
Look, I could simply speak from our own experience at ANSA McAL, and we were encouraged by the enabling environment present in Costa Rica and the Dominican Republic, and based on those enabling environments, based on the technical capability of partners, and based on the funding and financing that was attracted to that type of thing, we were able to, within the construct of our governance structure, the ANSA McAL Group, make investments there. So to me, the possibility of renewable and the possibility of renewable energy is, we discussed it at length today, it's there facing us. What private sector would get encouraged by is those attributes that I've described. And having those, well-defined, well-articulated, it wouldn't simply be local or regional private sector. You have global private sector and global funding, not just the development funding, no disrespect to them, that is seeking and looking to deploy and partake in this. And so I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, right? It does, because I could throw it back at Nirad now and ask you, Nirad, are private sector companies, are companies on the whole in Trinidad and Tobago being given the incentives to go after this green revolution that we all want?
Well, I would like to reframe the question in answering it to piggyback on Anthony's last point, right? This is not about only the private sector in the region. Just as our fossil fuel energy sector developed with international capital and international players, we have to think of any sector's development in such a way, and therefore the transition in such a way. Of course, we want to maximize local participation, but the reality is if we try to close it off, we're going to stifle innovation, we're going to run capital away, and we're going to see projects going to other places. And therefore, when you talk about potentially attracting investment and so on, when you initially raised the question, I was thinking of it of unlocking global capital to come here, but it's a little more than that, and maybe Kishan and others will talk about it. But as we go from our international commitments at COP and elsewhere, put that, as Ruana said, into a roadmap and sort of projectize it so that we can monitor the outcomes. Because it's not just about unlocking the capital, getting the project done, if it doesn't ultimately lead us to the objectives that we wanted. And then having the capacity to ensure that once there's the framework, once the objectives are set, we turn these into projects, and these projects a bankable, say something like NewGen, how does the arms of the state that have to interact with this to make this a reality that would work symbiotically with the attraction of capital? Because you may have an initial commitment or an outline approval for capital dependent on approvals from government or other entities to get you to step 2 or 3 or 4, and then the capital actually flows. But without that piece, then the capital goes away, because capital will go where it's wanted and where it can earn a return. Right. So we need to do a little better than that. Yes, there are many incentives that the government has implemented, 150%, I think, on accelerate, on depreciation for green equipment, no VAT on the importation. So there are things that the government is doing, and the government realizing it is I think, realizing it. But how do we get to the big things and not just the things that scratch the surface?
Yeah, one of the things that we need to get to ASAP, Kishan, would be we're about to see a hike in the electricity bills across Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things that would really help is really the introduction of solar power across the country that helps residential customers. How crucial is it that we get to that ASAP?
Feed-in tariffs.
I was going to grab it too. Sorry, no disrespect. I mean,
Please.
this guy's been negotiating stuff at a global level. We need to negotiate right here, feed-in tariff.
Please, Mr. Sabo,
and if we don't get a feed-in tariff here, that's a fantasy.
Yeah, Nira?
Yeah, ditto.
Yeah, well, let me say this first. Well, thank you for zeroing in on the crux of the matter. It's no secret that we have a very poor regulatory and policy framework for renewables and for green energy. That's not a secret. We've been working to fill that gap in many ways. But in doing that, there are also easy wins that can be achieved along the way. One of them being the feed-in tariff policy. And if I could be candid about it, I was on the first feed-in tariff policy committee exactly 14 years ago. 14 years ago. It had another incarnation recently, and I was on that as well. The feed-in tariff policy is now with the Ministry of Energy to be taken to cabinet. And I come back to the point that Niwed was making. We talk about, oh, it's expensive and too much financing, and we need all of this capital to really accelerate the transition. But if you do not have the enabling environment, you could have all the money at the world at your doorstep, you cannot take action. And to facilitate action, you have to have the regulatory, policy, institutional, administrative framework. And there are huge gaps when it comes to accelerating the, renewable energy and so on. The feed-in tariff policy is a very easy win. What that would afford residential and commercial customers is to generate their own electricity, and through a net billing or net metering mechanism, feedback onto the grid, so that you have more disposable income in your pockets. If you marry that with the electric vehicle EV policy and the hike in fossil fuel for transportation, if you want to transition away, energy transition is not only about power. It's also about use of fossil fuels. It's about in industry, it's about in transportations across the board. So it's not only about natural gas and oil. But if you have electric vehicle, let's say me or anyone in this room, if I have the incentives to put up a solar panel on my roof, generate electricity, I have more disposable income in my pocket. I could buy an electric vehicle until we get that price parity in place. I could buy an electric vehicle, charge it with solar energy, and reduce my bill for fossil fuels. It will help the state be less dependent on imports of liquid gasoline and so on. So that's monies to the states, that's savings. But it also helps more disposable income into the customer's pocket. And think about the socioeconomic benefits about that. Less stress, you reduce inflation. I'm not an economist, and I see Marie look at me and shaking her head, so I'm sure she's in agreement. But you have all of these knock-on co-benefits by simply implementing maybe one or two policies that are not rocket science, and setting the enabling environment is something that we have done. And look at how easy oil and gas investments are facilitated in Trinidad and Tobago to get us to the point where we are.
No.
To get us where we are. No, I mean historically.
I think Dr. Atz wants to join this panel as well.
No, but you know what I'm saying. To get us to where we are, that enabling environment had to have been created.
Yes.
Now, to get us to where we want to, we need to create that enabling environment as well, and it's not rocket science. Let me end by saying this: that when President Kennedy had visions of going to the moon, he didn't ask his scientists if it was possible. He asked them to get us there, and today we are on Mars. I say we as a planet.
Yeah, Dr. Driver, you want to add?
I just wanted to add just two minor points. One point, so there's a lot of talk about bringing renewables on to help people sort of offset costs of electricity, but the best way you can offset the cost of electricity is by energy efficiency. So, and that is an area where there's massive potential for investment from small businesses in Trinidad and Tobago, because there's just a huge opportunity for us to be much more energy efficient. There's things that have to happen at the grid level, with the power generation and energy efficiency there, but there's also just at a household, at a small business level, commercial level, simple energy management. You can reduce your bills by 40% for an average commercial property in Trinidad by simple energy management. So these are things, and so it's air conditioning and lighting, the two big things in that sector, and great opportunities for small businesses to do that. Second point on electric vehicles, we're actually already at price parity. Over 5 years, comparable cars, an electric car is cheaper over 5 years than an internal combustion engine, currently now, today. So we're already there on that, and that's why I think we're seeing this big, that's why our challenge is getting the brands in and enough cars, because you're just, which also doesn't help price parity, because the people who sell, I shouldn't say Anthony, but people who can sell cars, electric cars, can put the prices up a bit because there's a big demand for them. But we're there on that.
Yeah, I think Dr. Driver was being a little bit politically correct when he was talking about energy inefficiency. Efficiency, I should rather say. We're one of the worst abusers of electricity there is in the world.
Yeah, well, Trinidad is one of the least efficient places in the world at turning energy use into GDP.
Yeah, we are approaching the point of having questions and answer that segment. So please have your questions ready for any of the distinguished panelists that we have. But in the meantime, Dr. Driver, I want to go back to you and ask you about CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Measures. That's a critical point that has been discussed multiple times on this platform this morning. How is Point Lisas viewing CBAM? Is it being addressed?
Yeah, people are, obviously extremely aware of it, and people are trying to look at what are the measures. There is the green hydrogen route, but there's also then the carbon capture and sequestration route, the blue hydrogen route. So both those things are being very actively looked at. There's some building blocks we need to do to be able to make that stuff happen, but it is top of mind for people in Point Lisas industrial estate.
Yeah, Nirad, I just want to get your thoughts on this. As Trinidad and Tobago, a huge exporter of carbon-intensive products, especially to the European bloc, how concerned should businesses be, and what should we be doing at this moment to facilitate the future?
Well, I think Dax spoke about it, right? In that you have to adjust your business model because you become less competitive. It doesn't mean you can't export, it just means the cost of your product in the market increases relative to others. I think though, when we look at the energy transition as we would in any industry, and we consider that we're doing this in an industry that is well developed and globally competitive, we also have to look at what are the services and the ancillary businesses that could be created. So Dax mentioned carbon capture and storage. So the whole carbon credit market, we should be looking to enable the development of businesses here to be able to participate in those things. And of course, then you're creating a local cluster when you're able to do those, when you're able to have multiple businesses operating at different points on the value chain in the same geographic location. That will do many things, right? One is that it will create clusters here, but it will also make it more likely and competitive to collaborate, to go outside in different ways, and as well as just the whole innovation that comes from discussion and collaboration, where you have shared or similar business interests and the like.
Yeah, Mr. Saverin, I want to bring you back in here. You are the coordinator for climate finance back in Dominica, and I just wonder, what do we need to do in the region to access this much-needed climate finance? We are already seeing the impacts of climate change on a year-to-year basis on the Caribbean region.
Well, I think it is essentially what was discussed so far in terms of developing bankable projects that can then rush in the capital. The other thing to do would be the right kind of institutional framework for the capital. So two things. One, you do the de-risking, you develop bankable projects. Secondly, what kind of structures do you place to capture? So for example, we think of doing a national financing vehicle we have a general partner. We'll operate that vehicle with limited partners, with the various kinds of rates of return that they require, the right kind of incorporation in the appropriate jurisdiction where they have confidence in, and the appropriate kind of partner, general partner who have the ability to deliver the project. So the private capital is there in numbers. We need to do the groundwork in giving the right bankable projects, and also the institutional framework that give the capital the confidence that they can come in and put money in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Saverin.
If I don't mind, just quickly,
sure.
You talked about the feed-in tariffs before, mentioned before. While the feed-in tariff is required, we need to recognize as well that for the governments, that's a revenue source. And also for the importation of fuel, it's a revenue source, a revenue surcharge on the fuels, that is revenue. So when we talk about feed-in tariff, it must also accompany, others, right, must see, well, where is the revenue offset? That offset that is a loss for the tariff, how can it be captured otherwise? Otherwise, the state may be reluctant to move into the feed-in tariff, right? So those the private sector and others must think about a compensatory mechanism to offset the tariff.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Saverin. We have reached the question and answer segment. If you do have a question, please make your way to the microphones at COP29. And please, just as I reiterate, if you have a question, you can make your way to the microphone now. Kichan?
Yeah, well, COP28 actually had some big wins in the sense that we got the loss and damage fund. A fund finance does not make at the same time, but what we need to do now is, again, put the things in place so that we can access the funds that will come down the road. The big ticket item was the global stock take. And so what we now have to do is to put things in place to implement those outcomes going forward. The big ticket item for COP29, very briefly, is the new goal on international climate finance, which is called the NCQG, a new collective goal on climate finance. I used to coach.
Yeah, it is going to be a finance COP.
Yeah,
it is
going to be a finance COP.
You're right.
And so looking forward to deliberating on that big ticket item, because finance remains a bugbear in climate action across the world, and particularly in developing countries and vulnerable countries like Trinidad and Tobago. So for us, that would be one of the key points to make sure that we have a good outcome, an ambitious outcome on that goal, as well as some of the other things that came out of COP20 that need follow-up, certainly loss and damage fund and implementing some of those decisions.
I don't see anyone at the microphones, and if there aren't any questions, I just have two more for our panelists. Dr. Driver, I just want to ask you to summarize over the last 3 days, and I'm pretty sure you've had this question multiple times, but I'll ask you it anyway. Given that you've just said there are a number of gas projects on stream, we've spoken about Dragon Gas Steel, we've spoken about Calypso Project, and given the conversation that you have been having at this energy conference, the need to head towards more green energy, I just wonder what type of year do you foresee for Trinidad and Tobago as we try to battle on these two fronts, pushing ahead with the projects that we have won, but also moving in the greener direction?
Well, it is an and conversation. It's both the continued development of our gas-based industries, and it's bringing in renewable energy onto the electricity grid, and carbon capture, sequestration to reduce the commodities, and it's investing in green hydrogen to flow into the ammonia sector at the beginning, and it's fuel blending to add methanol to our existing gasoline to reduce the carbon footprint, and it's going on with compressed natural gases, and it's energy efficiency. Just it's and we need to stop thinking or and start thinking and.
Gotcha. Mr. Sapka, I'll end with you. I'll give you the final word. This has been a terrific session. This has been a terrific workshop, by the way. Congratulations to you and your team for putting on such an important workshop. What have you made of everything that has been shared this morning?
Look, I remain steadfast in my resolve and also my recognition that what we're discussing here is doable and will require concerted effort, a level of focus, engagement and dialogue. And we at the ANSA McAL Group, you can count on us to play that enabling and connecting role and utilizing the skills and expertise that we have, garnered and practiced for the last 143 years. And we can do this. We can do this. All right, thank you.
Mr. Sabda, thank you very much, and a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all very much.
Am I on? There's really nothing left for me to say. These discussions have been superb. I want to thank all of the panelists, the speakers who sent video messages, all of you who attended here today.